and welcome to Quantum Zilch. I'm Dennis Regan. I'm the host here. All of this is coming to you from an abandoned factory in the middle of nowhere. And this office here in the factory has been our home, or my home here, for the last 13 episodes. And this is, I think, the 14th episode. But I'm going to have to change offices. I'm going to have to move from this setup here, which has been great, because there's a leak in the roof, and it's been raining, and raindrops keep falling on my head. So we're going to have to move to another office. I found another office down the hall. Actually, it's on the 4th floor. It's almost as nice as this, but we'll be there next time. Now, I haven't done an episode of Quantum Zilch in well over a month. And the reason is because I'm a little bit concerned about overexposure here on the worldwide internet. All of the episodes that I've done so far have had over 100 views, some of them well over 100 views. And I was a little bit concerned about being overexposed here on the internet, like I said. So I just decided to back off a little bit, and now we're up and running. And that's that. So that brings us to today's segment. Okay, so today's segment, and I guess the episode too, is called Overexposure. Overexposure. Now, overexposure is a showbiz term, and I just used it that way. It's also a term used in photography. And I don't know what it means in photography. It has something to do with overexposing the picture. I'm sure using too much light or something, but I don't know. I don't know much about photography. But I have gotten the Image Blaster 4K V2 working very, very well. And I'm going to show you a picture right now. Okay, this is a picture that was taken in Fort Worth, Texas, which is near Dallas, in the year 1900. And it's a picture of the Wild Bunch, an outlaw gang. Sometimes they're called the Hole in the Wall gang. And it was led by the guy seated here, closest to me, on the bottom left here, Butch Cassidy. Butch Cassidy. You've heard of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Well, this was Butch Cassidy. This was the real guy. Now, Butch Cassidy was not his real name. His real name was Robert Leroy Parker, and he was the leader of the gang. Over here, seated on this side, is the Sundance Kid. Now, the Sundance Kid, that was not his real name. His real name was Harry Longbow. Okay? Now, seated in the middle is a guy named Ben Kilpatrick. Ben Kilpatrick, sometimes known as the Tall Texan. You can see he's kind of tall. Actually, he's seated, so you can't see that. But he was sometimes known as the Tall Texan. Not to be confused with Ed Too Tall Jones, who played football for the Dallas Cowboys a few years later in the same area here. Okay. Now over here we have, standing on the right, is William News Carver. News was his middle name because he used to like to read about himself in the newspaper, which would happen from time to time because these guys were bad guys. They were bandits and robbing trains and banks and stuff. So closest to me is a guy named George, standing, this guy here with the mustache, George Flatnose Curry. Now, they called him Flatnose. I guess you can figure that out. Okay, so that's what we do know about this picture. But there's a lot that we don't know. A picture is just one moment in time, just snap, that's it, just one instant. And when I see a picture like this, I always try to imagine what might have occurred immediately before the picture or immediately after. And I want to do that in this case here. Now let's start with before. Before this picture, I picture these guys milling about the studio, all except for Carver, because he's late. And they're wondering where Carver is, and they're getting mad. And Flatnose here with the mustache, he always liked to speak in cliches. So he says, he'd be late for his own funeral. Now, they're all a little bit concerned that when Carver does show up, that Ben Kilpatrick might go berserk and pull out his pistol and start pistol whipping Carver. Ben Kilpatrick is what today we would call a psychopath. But back then they just said he was batty. They called him batty, meaning he had bats flying around his head. But he was a nut. And this pistol whipping thing has happened before. And they're a little concerned that if it happens this time, that Carver is going to get all bloodied up. And that's really going to hurt the gang picture. It's going to ruin the gang picture. So Butch, who, like I said, is the leader of the gang, he tells Kilpatrick, look, when Carver gets here, just relax, let me handle it, stay calm, I'll handle it, and you don't worry about it, okay? Okay, so the four guys are milling about the studio there, and they're getting angry about Carver not coming, but they're also sort of arguing a little bit about who should sit where in the photograph, who should get to sit down, who should stand, and that kind of thing. And then Flatnose says to Sundance, the Sundance kid, hey kid, why don't you sit here? You should sit here. This would be a good place for you. And then Sundance says, I don't even like that nickname anymore. Because I'm going to be 40 years old. I'm pushing 40, and I don't want to be called a kid anymore. I don't think it's appropriate to be called a kid. So then Butch says, hey, maybe we should call you the Sundance middle-aged man, which gets a big laugh from everybody there. And then Flatnose says, hey, you think I like being called Flatnose? And that too gets a big laugh. Everybody's laughing except for Kilpatrick, he's fuming, he's steaming, waiting for Carver to get there so he can pistol whip him. So Carver finally does show up, and Butch says, where in tarnation have you been? And Carver gets all defensive and says, what are you talking about? You said 2:30, and it's not even 2:20 yet. And he shows him his pocket watch. You can see he's got a pocket watch there. And Butch says, I told you 2 p.m. I told you like 10 times, and besides, I put it on the schedule. I put the schedule in your box. Where's your schedule? And Carver says, I didn't check my box, but I remember you distinctly saying 2:30 p.m. I remember that. Now Kilpatrick is just getting madder and madder because he always checks his box like he's supposed to, and he has his schedule on him, and he pulls it out and he shows it to Carver, and let me pull that up here if I can. And he starts to read it to Carver. Okay, 2 p.m. Thomas Studio gang photo. 3:30 p.m. Cutter Pass Rob Stagecoach. 5 p.m. Wagon Wheel Saloon happy hour 2 for 1 rot gut. 10 p.m. Bar Room Brawl. Evening dress, 3-piece suits, and derbies. And Carver says, you know what, that's another thing. I don't want to wear a derby in the photo. He says, I'm sorry, I don't like derbies. I want to go hatless. He says, and he kind of demands that they have a vote. So the gang votes on it, and the vote is 4-1 in favor of derbies. And then Carver says, okay, you 4 wear a derby, and I'll go hatless. I won't wear one. And then Kilpatrick, who is just, Kilpatrick says, I think you're missing the whole point of the vote. Okay, so now the photographer shows up. His name is Thomas. And he's a little bit frazzled because he'd been down the street setting up for a wedding at the chapel. And he's got to be back there by 3 p.m., so he's a little bit frazzled. And he also has another concern. He just comes out and he asks the guys, hey, look, who's going to be responsible for the payment here? And Butch says, don't worry about that. Let's just get the photograph done, and we'll worry about that afterwards. And Thomas says, look, I don't do business that way. I'm sorry, but I need to get the money up front. And it's $1.75. So Butch pulls out 2 silver dollars, gives them to Thomas, and then says to the other guys, look, I'm going to need to get a quarter from each of you guys to pay for this, to pay for your part. To which Carver says, hey, look, no, hey, Butch, you owe me 25 cents for those bullets I bought on Monday. Now, the problem with this, and the guys are all a little bit anxious now because Carver just called Butch, Butch. And Butch Cassidy had made the appointment for this photo session under a different name, under an alias, because he's wanted by the law. They all are. They're all wanted. They're all bad guys. They're all outlaws. And there's wanted posters of all around the territory. $1,000 reward for any of them, dead or alive. But one thing they have going for them is the posters that are out there do not have photographs of them, because they haven't had their picture taken that much. So they're sitting there and they're all wondering, did this guy Thomas, did he hear Carver say Butch? Did he hear him say Butch? And if he did he put it together? Did he put all this together? Does he know? Now the camera back in those days would have been a big cumbersome thing. And you had to sit still for a few seconds for the photographer to get the picture. But Flatnose, who's kind of a fidgety guy all the time, he's being particularly fidgety today. So Thomas says, look, you got to stand still, my man, you got to stand still. And what's his name, Flatnose, admits, look, he's nervous because he's never had his picture taken before. He admits that he's never had his picture taken. And he asks Thomas, he says, is it going to hurt? So all the guys laugh, they're all laughing at that, except for Kilpatrick, who now wants to kill Flatnose. But finally, click, they get the picture. It's the picture we see here. It's the picture we see here today. And then Butch makes an executive decision. He says, look, because we're running late and because tensions are high, he decides we're going to postpone the stagecoach robbery until the following Tuesday. And the guys all walk over to the wagon wheel to wet their whistles with whiskey. So we don't know what happened over there at the Wagon Wheel Saloon that night, and we don't know if the barroom brawl happened on schedule. But here's some things that we do know. A couple of weeks later, this wanted poster comes out. This wanted poster comes out with their photograph on it. The heat is on. Butch and Sundance, they skedaddle to South America, where they are eventually gunned down by the Bolivian army. Kilpatrick, he heads for Tennessee, but he's captured and sent to prison for a long time. Flatnose, he's tracked down and shot by a posse in Colorado. And he ends up shooting himself in the head to end it all. And William News Carver, well, he goes down to Texas and he's ambushed by a bunch of sheriff deputies. He's shot 6 times. And he's dead at the age of 32. So as it turns out, Carver, he was early for his own funeral. All because of a little overexposure. So that ends this episode of Quantum Zilch. I hope you'll come back and you'll see me in my new digs down the hall. In the meantime, take care of yourself. And look out for each other.